Okay.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
All right. Are we on, Seren?
Yes, we are on, and I'm going live on Facebook right now.
Yeah, but all I see is the poster. Can they see us? I don't think they can see us right now. We see the background.
Yes, let me. Okay.
All right. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this second Social Consciousness Unchained series. This is a new initiative by the Center for European and International European Studies at Kadir Has Universities in partnership with the Corporate Social Responsibility Association of Turkey and a new private consulting firm called Social Approval, based in Ankara, where we decided that there was a need. This idea sort of developed during our being quarantined and at home, and how our habits sort of changed given the existentialist, in a way, nature of COVID-19, about the post-COVID era, even though I'm not sure whether we are in the post-COVID-19 era, but nevertheless, as we are opening up and circulating more, and all our societies and economies are sort of trying to rebuild, they are on the mend. We've been thinking about whether there's a new way of doing business, whether the new normal includes more social, civil society involvement, and hence this discussion, this webinar on the role of politics in civil society, because politics has also come back strong. We've seen this with developments across Europe. We've seen this with what's happening in the United States, and the implications and the links on Europe, and hence this webinar. But before I move on and introduce the speakers and ask them questions, so we start our discussion, I'd like Serdar Dinler, who is the president of CSR Turkey and my main partner on this initiative, to also say a couple of words on behalf of his organization.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. I would like to welcome you to Social Consciousness Unchained webinar series. It is a great honor to host your distinguished guest, and I'm sure that it will be a great session and participants will benefit from your contributions. As a partner of Social Consciousness Unchained initiative, I would like to introduce you Corporate Social Responsibility Association of Turkey, which is an independent NGO formed in 2005 by the effort of academics, business world, and other civil society organizations. The purpose of the Corporate Social Responsibility Association is to raise awareness of CSR institutions and create public opinion within this framework, to publish scientific research, provide consultancy services to institutions, organize seminars and panels. Currently, CSR Turkey operates approach based on sustainability, corporate governance, public and civil society, and private sector partnership. That's what we're working nowadays. And I would like to thank you, and would like to hand over to our moderator, Professor Dimitri Triantafilou. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Serdar. So today's talk is about, I'm trying to find myself here, okay. So today's discussion is about the intersection basically between politics and civil society in this post-COVID-19 era. And we have with us three distinguished speakers. Hannes Swoboda, Dr. Hannes Swoboda, who is currently the president of the International Institute for Peace that's based in Vienna. Hannes Swoboda, I think many of you are aware, is a long-standing political figure in both Austrian and European politics. He started his career in Vienna in urban politics and was elected member of European Parliament in 1996. And in European Parliament, he was there for quite a few years, where in 2012, until 2012, he was the vice president of the Social Democrat group. And until between 2012 and 2014, the president of the Social Democrat group in the European Parliament. He's particularly engaged in foreign enlargement and neighborhood policies. And apart from his current hat as the president of the Vienna Institute, of the International Institute for Peace, he's also involved in the Vienna Institute for International Economics, the Center of Architecture, the Sir Peter Ustinov Institute, and many other initiatives in Austria. Our other speaker is David Wisner, who is the executive director of the Michael and Kitty Dukakis Center for Public Humanitarian Service at the American College of Thessaloniki. David has a PhD in modern history from the University of Rochester and has written extensively on the French Revolution, neo-idealist epistemology, neoclassical art in a number of well-known journals. And he's also the author of an acclaimed book on the origins of the French Revolution, as part of a series at Oxford University Press, and as well as a collection of essays on the Greek sovereign debt crisis. And since coming to Greece in the mid-1990s, he has been actively involved in issues such as civic education, public policy, and US involvement in Southeastern Europe, having participated in a number of projects by a number of international institutions. And by running in his capacity as director of the Dukakis Center, he has organized a number of lectures, roundtables, and workshops on a number of national, regional, international public policy issues. A committed member, if I remember correctly, of the Democratic Party in the US, but he's very, very much aware of and very knowledgeable about US politics, and I think his contribution will be important in our discussion. And our third speaker is Dr. Thanasius Ramenos, who is a scientific advisor of the Young Liberals of Greece. He's based in Athens. He has a PhD also from the University of Macedonia. And part of that PhD was published into a book, which it's a book about help me, Athanasios, Archbishop Iakovos. I was
and human rights activists.
Exactly. Well, Archbishop Iakovos of America, who was Archbishop for a long time and very much involved in human rights and civil rights, knowing Martin Luther King when Martin Luther King was alive. And there are some parallels to what some of the things that Athanasios has written about to what's happening in the US today. Athanasios, as I said, is a founding member of the Young Liberals of Greece, as he's gotten beyond which is a non-partisan pro-European political organization aiming to diffuse liberal values among Greek youth. As he has exceeded now the age limit for being considered a youth, he's still the youngest person on the panel anyway. He's a scientific advisor to the Young Liberals of Greece and a mentor. And he also is a project manager for Greece of the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung for Liberty, which is basically the foundation, the political foundation of the liberals in Germany, the Free Democrats. So the idea is to have a debate. I plan to do this in a couple of rounds, and basically the idea is, are we living through a defining moment in global history, European and global history? And to start it off, we'll start with Hannes, then David, and then Athanasios. I have two very general questions. The first one is, what are the political implications of the COVID-19 crisis, given its societal, its economic and political impact? And as governments seek to move towards some sort of normalcy, especially in terms of jump-starting the economy, is this a case of business as usual, or has the pandemic affected the way forward? Is there a role in ideology in the process? Because we hear a lot, for example, in the Greek case, there's a debate that you have a liberal prime minister running a center-right government who has said favored supporting the national health system, during the crisis over the economy, and has said that now, as we are moving to the post-crisis stage, he's a Keynesian. There's a pragmatism in terms of his approach. And if one goes through parallels, for example, to what happened to the period of the Great Depression in the 30s with the crash and so on, you saw two trends emerge in Europe and the US. FDR said, we're going to try to figure out to support society with great works and so on, so that the US economy doesn't crash. And therefore, this politically also saved American democracy, while we had a different trend, for example, in Europe, with fascism and Nazism emerge in Germany and Italy, and then in other parts of Europe. Not only Greece had it, Spain and other countries as well. And that led to what, the consequence of that was World War II. And I'm not suggesting that we are in a period that we might end up going to war with each other, but the forces of populism and but also the forces of pragmatism, how you handle the economies and how you move forward is something that we need to discuss. And since we are in this 21st century where civil society, which is us, each and every single one of us, is playing a bigger role, it'd be interesting to see whether, what is the intersection between politics and civil society. So it's a wide-ranging question. And maybe Hannes, you want to start telling us some of your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you. I'm very happy about that. Now, let me say at the beginning, we don't know yet what the effect will be, because we don't know, is this pandemic just an interruption and will be over in some months' time, or what most people expected will have a long-term influence. Now, the influences will be first on democracy. In many countries, decisions have been taken quickly, fortunately, but also without democratic parliamentary legitimation. Some countries it was done, but nevertheless, there is some use by some politicians to implement or introduce even more undemocratic authoritarian measures. So it may be also that we have a spread between democracies who did it in a democratic way and what some, like Mr. Orban, called illiberal democracy, in a less democratic way, more authoritarian way. So there's one element. Secondly, we have the situation in the past years already that the income distribution between rich and poor had a widening gap already. Now, of course, some people say the pandemic, the virus is affecting everybody equally. Yes, but the consequences, especially the economic consequences, is very different. It's not only between poor and rich. It may be also because some people who are self-employed are very much affected by it because they have not that kind of support, especially in the cultural scene, the neglect of cultural scene and other things. Mothers with children who are alone at home, schools are closed. What does it mean? What does closed school mean for children of poorer, less educated parents? So we have a new mixture of different effects on different parts of the society. And the third element, of course, is about climate change. Is it setback for climate change because people say we have other issues to do, or may it even be that people say, well, the short-term issue is health and is the virus, but the long-term effect, we have to spend our activities and money in that direction. That is now also the debate inside Europe about the recovery package. Where should the money go? Everybody speaks about where does the money come from, but where should the money go? In what area should we invest? Maybe a fourth element, because cities have been mentioned, is of course a rebalance between city and countryside. Some people say, well, it's better to live now in the countryside because we are separated, we are not totally so close to each other. So there are many aspects which are not yet clear how to do. And I think civil society becomes an enormous role in this new normal which should not be the normal now, or the normal in the past, but should be a new normal, a really new normal, where democracy is strengthened, where people think about who is affected negatively or positively. We have also some winners. Zoom, for example, the winner. We have many, of course, people who lose. And then, of course, in the climate change, we should not get rid of our engagement for climate change. That would be very important. So I see some changes. They are not so dramatic for the moment. And I think civil society should play a role in keeping up the basic values we were fighting for in the past 20, 30 years. And they get even more influence, or should get more influence than it was in the past. So that's perhaps for the beginning some thoughts for discussion.
All right. Thank you very much, Hannes, for your points. So we have the whole debate about democracy and illiberal democracy, which is emerging, distribution between rich and poor, widening gaps, has to do with social cohesion, and different categories. It's not just rich and poor, but different categories of the workforce, whether it's working mothers or people that are self-employed, the issue of climate change and how it comes in, and also the whole issue of urban, rural rebalancing, and one has to consider all of these. David, the same question, same general question. What are your thoughts about what is happening?
Okay, well, I'll play a bit the devil's advocate. Your question whether this is a defining moment, and I would suggest no, for a very simple reason. In my lifetime, for the period of time that I've lived abroad, we've lived through several crisis cycles, beginning with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the demise of communism in Eastern European countries and the fall of the Soviet Union. And I just keep coming back to one particular crisis which was predicted but never took place, and that would be Y2K. And there was so much speculation about how this unprecedented phenomenon would leave us uprooted and disrupt every fragment of society. And then it was a bit of a dud. I remember celebrating New Year's Eve in 1999 to 2000, and then I woke up on January 1st, 2000, and nothing happened. My alarm clock worked, my cell phone was working. So I would say I'd rather not be alarmist with regard to the present circumstances, because, you know, we had, after Y2K, we had 9/11. We've had a series of moments which captivate our imagination and which lead us to say, this is it, this is a big one. If you're a surfer, you know what I mean. There's always a bigger wave coming next. And I'd rather that we not debate this hypothetical possibility. I had a thought about politics. There's an article published by Archon Fung of Harvard University a couple of days ago. I shared it on the Facebook page of the Dukakis Center. And he suggested the way out of our present circumstance in the lockdown, in particular, facing an unknown public health emergency, is more democracy. And my immediate response was, this is impossible. It's not possible to have more democracy if the ways in which we engage with one another are sitting in front of a computer screen, isolated in reality from the social world. So it's rather hard to imagine whether the political problems we were facing already, and the fears of the rise of authoritarianism, of illiberal democracy, to which Hannes alluded a moment ago, the problems we fear in the United States, whether President Trump is some sort of closet dictator, we are already in a moment where we're questioning where we are going to. And it's impossible, I think, to imagine under the present circumstances that we find some resolution to those sorts of problems that were already plaguing us before the outbreak of COVID-19. However, that is not to suggest that it's not going to happen. The beautiful thing about studying politics, about engaging with young citizenry in particular, as we do at the Dukakis Center, is that people will find a solution. And I just have the example, the alleged example of the teens using certain social media to disrupt President Trump's rally in Oklahoma the other day, using TikTok and using other social media to, in essence, to prank the President of the United States. If that's possible, it is possible for us to find solutions to our political ills. I'm not certain whether I would be the person to suggest what those solutions are, but there's every likelihood that our younger generation will show us the way.
Thank you, David. I mean, yeah, it's true. You're going a bit against the conventional wisdom, which suggests that maybe there's a need for more democracy. And I am with conventional wisdom. And if I try to link what you said with what Hannes said, I mean, the social cohesion divide is also a generational thing. I think about my son, who's a 25-year-old, who's an angry young man. He was before this crisis because of uncertainty with job uncertainty and so on, and even more so now. And maybe Thanasius, who is, as I said, the baby on this panel, could also maybe, and he just came back anyway. He just came back from a meeting the young liberals of Greece just had in Crete. So this generational dimension, the younger generations that David alluded to, maybe there is something out there. And it's very interesting, you're right, this TikTok and other social media that they used to disrupt the Tulsa gathering was fascinating. So Athanasius, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I have to say, although it might sound like a cliche, but I'm really honored for this invitation, and I feel privileged to be in a panel with distinguished speakers, which I personally admire for years. I hope that I will do my job well and express myself and people that work with me on an almost daily basis, I would say. So our topic is social consciousness, and I think that for the first time after many, many years, we understand that the traditional claim of modernity, the rights of the individual and the individual, the holy value of the individual oneself, is not separate for the good, for the benefit of the community. And there must be balance to what those two, or how those two interact, because we are simultaneously individuals, and we want, we desire our rights, but at the same time these rights take meaning in the community, in the world of politics, of democratic politics, the state, when we have elections, when we have procedures, social and political procedures. And I think that the pandemic, this very strange and very weird situation that we have lived in the last 2 months, maybe is the gate to enter a new phase in the history of capitalism, which is out of our control. At least it appears to be out of our control. This makes me think also the protests we have seen now in the United States, the economic problems that come in many countries, also in Greece, that Greece expected this summer to go out of the crisis, to feel for the first time confidence financially. We see that something is not at the desired level. There are many things left yet to do. And I was reading a book one of the latest books of Fukuyama. Fukuyama is very well known for his end of history quote, which was misinterpreted by many people, especially by those who call themselves liberals. It was taken as a naive or optimistic view, but instead Fukuyama was implying something more serious and more deep, which now he says again in his book about identity. He's the first to claim that the US institutions are in decay because of the power of lobbies and of some interests that take the power out of the people, out of the democratic control, and he calls it this situation as a decay. In countries like Greece now, I was thinking that, well, we all know that democracy in the United States is very strong. We know that they have a system that it is very competitive. But in countries like Greece, on the other hand, institutions had always had serious problems. And let me explain for someone who is not familiar with Greek politics. The Greek landscape, the political landscape, the constitutional order, the political system, the elections, all the things that we call politics in general, lacks any kind of checks and balances. And society's role is really limited essentially to voting every 4 years. Essentially, the prime minister is the one who controls the entire game. But then from Fukuyama, I jumped to a sociologist at Harvard, Robert Putnam. I think that he's quite famous, who was the first to consolidate the notion of social capital. And thinking about social capital, which is all the networks of people, of ideas, of values, it's a big cluster of the potential, of the social potential. If you don't have if you don't have a real representation of society, of social groups, if you don't have individuals being interested and being active, if you don't give them the floor, this social capital goes wasted. Why? Because they feel that they are underrepresented, and then it comes anger, as you said, Dimitris, before about your son. I remember also myself a few years earlier, and to some extent, many people like me are still angry. Although now, as you approach your 40s, you learn how to control this anger and try to make it creative for the benefit of the society. So we see that these people who feel desperate about the situation in our society, they tend to go abroad. And these people are talented people, are skilled people, or are just people who are committed to a cause, and they say that they cannot find it in their own land, so they have to travel abroad. And now I come again to the actual question, which is also part of my expertise, because I work with young people and especially with the Young Liberals Greece, who do a very, very good and committed effort to talk to people in Greece, to young people, and say that they have to be more active, although it's quite vague. How can you be more active if representation is not really the thing here? So I think that now the situation as it is urges many people for recognition. It presses them to say that we are here. And this is not only a Greek problem, it is generally a problem of our Western societies. And from this is born the politics of identity, which, although it is very important for people to defend their identity, and the identities are not static, we have to say they're dynamic creations, they change and they evolve with the time, but there is a small danger that becomes greater and greater. It can fragment society and then make the social
Mute. Athanasius, we lost Athanasius. Let's see if he can unfreeze his computer. I mean, he's been raising very interesting things, and I think used, the Robert Putnam's social capital and how you apply to it, and maybe until he gets back on track, we can sort of start moving to the second round of questions, which has to do in part with what Athanasios was talking about. How do social movements sort of factor into this process, right? Because we've talked a little bit about the politics and where we think things are going or not going, but then what role for civil society and the emergence of, again, a new social consciousness, which again, for me and Serda, when we started thinking about this series of talks, we were thinking frankly about how the crisis has impacted us individually, and therefore what can we do, and a continuation of the work we were doing anyway beforehand. And so what we've seen now, I mean, yes, Athanasi, I'll give you the floor in the second round because we...
Of course, I'm sorry, we have a very bad internet connection and...
It's fine.
I'm sorry.
It happens. And so I'm also thinking, because it's one of the things we did not fathom what was happening in the US with the George Floyd murder and the implications of that, because it's gone through many manifestations, right? And so there is a sense of anger there too. And the whole debate that's emerging, I mean, some of it is healthy, some of it is not. But one has to understand that by and large, this is a peaceful movement. It's a movement where people feel the need to go out to the street and protest against something. Maybe it's anti-systemic, and this anti-systemic notion was there beforehand. But now as we're moving to the next phase, it's coming out, and anti-systemic movements could end up being and politically being manipulated to become populist, and whether it's like extreme left or radical right populism, but there's also some value to them in terms of the expression of civil society into the new dynamics that are being formed. So where does civil society therefore come in? I mean, you've touched upon some of these topics, right? And then the last point based on this too, because I mean, to be honest, there's always, we talked about it before we came online, always flack about panels like ours, which is 4 white men, whether we are representative and whether we have a right to talk, because this is also part of the thing. So there's a generational thing, younger generation saying, you screwed it up for us, and it's our turn. And so it's a generational thing. It's your generation that I hear my son say, and others hear their children say. But there's also the gender issue. There's also the race issue, the ethnic issue. There's also, again, the economic dichotomies are out there, and maybe not everybody has access to be able to do this. So how do we move all of this forward? Maybe in a, so is it a question of democracy, or less democracy, more democracy, or it's a question of more, cohesion as we move forward? So maybe Hannes, the floor is yours.
First of all, let me say that, of course, things don't develop as quickly as we something think. As David said, I think it was Zhou Enlai who was asked about the French Revolution, and he said it's too early to evaluate it, the effects, like other things. But I think, coming to your point, what is important is that we should not, what the mistake was of politicians my age, and I'm probably the oldest here, is to accept that things are developing very slowly and not being enough engaged. And nowadays, my feeling is that people are even, many politicians are even less engaged for a social cause. And that brings, of course, young people to the streets. Even, let's say, the US, seeing from the outside, and others may see it differently. And I like very much Obama, but maybe because he was black, he was a bit too timid to raise the issue of race or of colonialism. Colonialism not only of the past, but also of the present. For example, the question about the Rhodes, statue of Mr. Rhodes in Oxford, I think, was raised again and again, but nothing was happening. People said, well, be quiet. Now it was a bit of an explosion. And I think maybe empathy, and Anastasia spoke about anger. Probably we are not enough angry on some of the issues. We're not enough angry that racism still exists. We're not enough angry that exploitation. Look, we drink coffee, we drink cacao, we use rare metals from in Africa, exploited by some people. The environment is exploited, and we are really angry. We have not enough empathy. That is important. We need more emotion also in politics, not in the sense of, let's say, having the people, you know, emotional in the sense of dividing the society, but more emotion that we don't accept poverty. Look, of course, we have been successful in fighting poverty in many countries, but still, if you look what is happening in our own country, in Greece, in Austria, and other countries, we should not accept these things. And therefore, I think it is very, very important to bring young people into the politics. They show more emotion, they show more interest in the future. As the Fridays for Future demonstrations on the environmental issue made it very clear, they think about the future and they attack us rightly, I think, in many ways, that we don't think about the future. We just think about the present to arrange things. And we learn not enough out of politics. There are at least one, because you mentioned the question of public spending and Keynesianism. At least here we seem to have learned. I don't know if it's forever, but for some time we have learned that we have to go into public spending to avoid a big economic crash. But I think it is we should not criticize the young people that they go to the street. Of course, we should criticize exaggerations and destruction of shops and so on, but we should be very happy and say this is a good sign for democracy, that there are protests, that people are not accepting everything which is happening in this world. No, I don't know, maybe I only see.
Okay. You started off with the mea culpa, which is also very interesting, and it's the toughest thing in a way, as we consider what we have done, and we're still active, very much active and engaged in our society, and so it's how it's become more inclusive. David, let's hear your non-conventional wisdom thoughts.
All right. Well, I want to make one little correction on your introduction, that I'm a very proud independent. I don't have a formal party affiliation. My relationship with Michael Dukakis is really out of personal admiration. I would have supported a good number of the causes that were important for him. But when you're talking about young people, it's important for them to have space to develop their own sense of affiliation, not to say, well, the Democrats or the Social Democrats or the liberals are the ones that have the correct answer. I certainly don't have the correct answer. I come from a family which is about as diverse as you can possibly imagine. And I was led to reflect and just jot down a few notes as Hannes was making his point about anger and empathy and emotion in politics. Well, here's the question. Are we angry about the right things? Are we angry about the same things? I have an obligation to see what people are saying regardless of their political affiliation. And in online fora like Instagram or Facebook, I encounter a lot of anger among people who are adamant about the right to bear arms, who are angry about legislation legalizing abortion, who are angry about the realities of immigration in various states in the United States, who refuse to wear a mask because they're free not to, and who are really, really furious about the legacy of someone we both admire, Barack Obama. So what do we say to those people? If we're encouraging democratic debate and deliberation in the hope that we reach a consensus, or there is some degree, some mainstream left in our societies, are we not going to take into consideration that there are an awful lot of people who are angry about things that don't disturb us, They're angry now about the fact that the statue of Theodore Roosevelt was removed from in front of the New York Public Library. And I have to say, that's something that disturbs me as a historian. I'm not certain I like the idea of having Confederate monuments here and there in the United States, state capitals. I don't like the Confederate flag, but okay, at a certain point in time, you have to realize that maybe you're pushing a little too far with your anti-systemic anger. There has to be some way to retreat and be able to find common ground, at least develop. Civil society used to be the place where we could engage in this kind of dialogue like we are here, because we come from different political spaces. We would want to hope that young people can reestablish that middle ground where they can communicate with each other without being consumed by their anger. Okay, that's a bit of that's my rant, okay, Dimitri?
Myself, yeah, it's not really a rant. I think you've made very, very valid points, and this is our problem, is trying to understand how we move ahead. Before I give the floor to Thanasius, I want to say, for those that are listening, if you have any questions to the speaker, you can use the chat button on Zoom. For those that are on Facebook, it would be better if you get on Zoom. So because we cannot really manage questions from Facebook. You can follow us there, but anyone who has questions, please use the chat function, and then we'll try to respond to you. Thanasius, your turn. I mean, in a way, what I was saying is, when we were cut off, that some of the things you were saying, you had already gotten into the second question in a way with what some of your comments, and I think we followed up on this. So please go ahead.
I liked very much what I heard about anger, the criticism to anger. Indeed, we see the last weeks that anger comes from everywhere. And it makes me say that, well, the young people are always angry. Maybe it's part of their nature. They have this tension, this passion for life, and they also want to change the world. Maybe you have seen this classical movie, Rebel Without a Cause. You don't need a cause to get angry. But sometimes you just feel that this is the way you have to do things. So you can be angry, but I want to focus on why we have anger, regardless the origins. You can be angry for whatever reason, but why anger? Why we end up with being aggressive, with being offensive, with fighting? So I think that our institutions have failed us. I start again from what I left about what Fukuyama claimed about the democratic decay. I believe also that our political systems have failed us. Again, I will highlight the situation in Greece. We have a state that it is fully controlled by the prime minister. And the prime minister is the one who according to a Greek scholar, he's an elected monarch. That's how a Greek scholar recently characterized this identity. And of course, capitalism becomes crony in our days and fails us. We don't have free competition. I mean, as a liberal, I would argue in favor of a social open market economy. But very recently, we see that politics and financial agents interact in a way that is shady, not really transparent. The European Commission is trying to establish some rules in many countries, not only Greece, but you can see the case of Hungary, you can see Czechia, you can see Romania. There are many things yet to be desired. And then what happens? We turn against each other. Then we invent anger. We grow anger. Then we have this politics of resentment. Identity politics come in play. And we are fragmented, and finally our society gets more and more polarized. So here is where I think that we have the problem. And part of our work with the young liberals is to teach as many people as possible that they need to be cool, they need to be first of all observers, and not to be ready to fight, not to be unjustified, angry people. And then at this point, I will definitely agree with the previous speakers, but I don't know, from my position, I don't know what I can do more than succumb to the role of civil society. The rest of it is a matter of politics and the interaction between the political class and the grassroots, the society itself.
If I may just briefly react.
Go ahead, Hannes, please.
No, I understand also what David said and the reaction. It's not, but if we leave the anger only to the, let's say, right wing, only the people who resent, then we have to live with that. If we don't express any more emotion, sympathy or empathy, then it will also be only be a right wing, let's say, reactionary reaction to it. This is my argument. Of course, anger, emotions have to be controlled, have to be done in a way where they are open to reason. But some of these people, on the other hand, whom David was mentioning, they are not open to reason. They just have this kind of suspicion and this kind of resentment. This is what's because they get the role. If we only think everything is only pragmatic, everything can be done only in a rational way, and we disregard any kind of the emotion people have, even emotion of these people who are, let's say, left over or feel themselves left over. We didn't even understand their feeling because emotion was put away out of politics, and it comes back in a, let's say, very reactionary way from the behind side. And even Fukuyama in his book wrote where, when he spoke about the end of history, he said, maybe end of history is not coming because people react because they are not happy to have some goods only and to have some money. No, they will react because they need more. And even Fukuyama quite rightly said that maybe the end of history will not come because emotion will come again into the playing field. Just a short reaction.
Good. Any one of you two, David or Athanas, want to react also to some of the things you heard before? I mean, we have a couple of comments, but please.
Well, just say that I'm actually in perfect agreement with Hannes to say, if you left the anger pent up, then it becomes something out of control and destructive. I saw a post on Facebook the other day. One of my boyhood neighborhoods, who's a fairly solid supporter of Donald Trump, citing something to the effect. I guess it was Joe Biden who said George Floyd has had more global impact than Martin Luther King ever did in such a short space of time. And they were scratching their head and say, what kind of idiot would say a thing like this? And that's precisely because there's been so much incredible anger built up over racial discrimination in the United States, which is a fact. You can't deny the lasting effects of the institution of slavery on American society. Such would be to deny that you live in a country that had such a practice. But here it is, these people are unaware fundamentally that a very sizable number of their neighbors feel this anger, which has been there for a very long period of time. I think that helps us understand the explosion of protests in the United States, and not only within the United States, outside the United States also. I don't know what one saw in Athens. I think there was a small demonstration, but certainly in France and other countries in Europe have experienced similar sorts of protests. And it's not merely that they sympathize or they don't like Donald Trump, is that this is a reality of life in our societies. And there has to be some way for a person to go out and express it. And it is not unhealthy. I rather agree with Hannes here. It's a very healthy and important part of civil society to go out and protest a fundamental injustice.
Yeah. Thanasius, you want to add something, or should I go to the questions?
Just one comment, which is a question, a big question, a question for a paper, maybe book. I don't know in our political systems what we can make out of these protests. So, of course, I support and I definitely admire the courage of people who go out. But as I said before, I don't see any actual leeway out of this situation, because we've seen it also in the Greek crisis in 2011. The people went out, and after a couple of weeks of gathering in the center of Athens, out of the parliament, in the Syntagma Square, in peaceful protests, fully peaceful protests, then out of the blue, without any cause, we would see just a small bunch of people that they would provoke violence, they would attack the police. And there is a big question, who are they? That no government has ever managed, to take them out, to uncover their faces. They're wearing masks. Before it was cool, before COVID.
Athanasios, unfortunately, we're seeing this now in the United States. Yeah. It's an import from Europe. I don't think we ever had such a phenomenon that you could almost predict that the troublemakers would be waiting to take over a peaceful and legitimate protest. And it's quite unfortunate.
I'm afraid that this is not a coincidence. I'm very suspicious about how a peaceful protest with people who are definitely peaceful and they are democratic and the only thing that they want is justice. Actually, some of them, after a point when the protest becomes very, very popular, they become violent. I'm not convinced, if you get my point. And this is a systemic danger that says that the state has always tools and weapons to come again out when control seems to have been lost.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm looking at some of the comments that we've received. I mean, and some of them are from people that are actively engaged in civil society. And so it's interesting. And Stefanos Valianatos suggests that maybe anger, especially when expressed publicly, can also be an opportunity for this 15 minutes of publicity that we talk about, right? The Andy Warhol 15 minutes moment in an era where publicity becomes a desired commodity. Because there's a bit of that also, there's that dimension, and especially maybe with younger generations, the Instagram generation, the Facebook generation, whatever. And so that's something to consider. There's also Robert Lewis, who's a colleague of mine at Kadir Has University, and he has a very interesting comment. He says that he heard Noam Chomsky addressing the Cambridge Union last month. And Chomsky claimed that, in fact, we should recognize that in many areas, including women's rights, LGBTQ politics, even racial issues, things are far better today than they were 50, 60 years ago, right? That's probably the go slow approach that, in a way, Hannes, you sort of referred to also, in a sense. So was he wearing rose-colored spectacles, or is it, this is a question that Rob is raising, or is it, I would take it further and suggest that maybe it is a question of Chomsky, who is very much the revolutionary in this sense of the word, is also very much aware. I mean, he's also bringing in his experience. I mean, as someone who has lived a long life and is able to better sort of understand what is happening, and maybe he's concerned also as well about a lot of these things happening. I'm always thinking in the US too, I always think a lot of what is happening is sort of the Bernie Sanders movement that's also expressing itself very actively. I don't know if you agree with me, David, in that sense, because there's some of that. If I may, there's also Hazel Can Elbir, who is from Ankara, and she asks whether, can we say, because of the intolerance due to COVID-19 and the anger in the US, especially against China, does this encourage racist or racism in society? And it's fueling xenophobia around the world. So these are some of the comments. Do any of you want to take them up? Do you have anything to say?
Well, just to come in briefly, you always have crazy people who use normal movements for the exaggerated and destructive elements. everywhere. So this fight, how to prevent it, you had now in Stuttgart, for example, in Germany, there was no reason at all, just the control of one young guy without of drug consumption. All of a sudden, there was an explosion. So this cannot be avoided. Secondly, because you mentioned Bernie Sanders, I think that the real difficulty is how to combine protest, emotion, empathy, and so on, maybe even anger, with, at the end, pragmatic policies to translate it into something the broader community is accepting. I think this is the big issue. And here sometimes also civil society organizations or NGOs fail because they only see their purpose and they don't see how now we have to convince people to go another way. Climate change will be the big issue. People are always, we have to fight climate change. But once they have to consume less, let's say less meat, or they have to pay a higher tax or whatever, the protest will be here. And I think politicians have the big task, and that is difficult, to combine these emotions and this anger about what is happening in this world and transform it into a pragmatic implementation of policies. And I think in the past, let's say, decade, it was a bit one-sided. There was just only pragmatism. And now we have to have this combination, and of course, in a democratic way, because the way out of it for some people, like Mr. Orban, or some of the Polish, or Mr. Trump, is to go the other authoritarian way. Don't speak about the problem, just show the strong man, mostly men, not women. And that, I think, is the wrong way. And here we have to find a democratic debate about the issue, including the debate about, there are some statutes where you can say you have to put them away. But of course, there are personalities like Mr. Churchill or others who have a negative side, but of course, very much a positive side as well. It is a very complex issue, and we should not reduce complexity to some slogans alone.
Yeah. No, I think the balance is the most important thing. I mean, like you said, how do you balance anger, empathy, emotion with pragmatism, which also puts, I guess, the onus of responsibility also on civil society. It's not just civil society against the state or the institutions or whatever, but civil society itself being active. David, do you want to come in here?
Well, yeah, it was a comment that was made by a New York Times columnist, David Brooks, I think 2 weeks ago, when he was responding to some degree to opinions and the feelings of the younger generation about which we've been speaking, a very younger generation, not even of age to vote. Generation Z, I think, is what they're calling it now. And this is a generation that apparently has no time nor patience for the kinds of institutions that make life in a democracy possible. A large part of what I do and what we do at the Dukakis Center focuses on these institutions. It's not very sexy. I mean, maybe get out the vote drive or voter registration drive for citizens of the United States who come to Greece for a semester. But there are other things, I mean, basic practices that you see in parliamentary assemblies. I was just reading a post on Facebook. Somebody was talking about the advanced work that the staff of President Trump should have done before he even went out on the stage in Tulsa. And those are the kinds of things that you need to heed and consider before democracy is possible. Otherwise, you're going to end up with chaos, and it'll be worse. So somehow civil society, you know, I'd say, I mean, we call ourselves a member of civil society, if you want to put it that way. And certainly we think a little bit, it's not a matter necessarily of being conservative to say there's certain things that we have in place that suit our purpose, that we need to have people understand before they can start imagining how we can transform them and make them better and be able to adapt to the sorts of problems that our societies face. You can't merely go out and protest and accept that tomorrow the world is going to be a better place. And unfortunately, that is sometimes missing. And that would be perhaps the one dimension of the younger generation that I worry about, that there isn't a sufficient awareness of the importance of certain institutionalized practices without which you can't really have a functioning polity. Aristotle knew that very well.
But of course, on the other hand, I mean, Hannes mentioned Greta Thunberg. I mean, she has a role. She's protesting. She's leading these Friday protests, and hopefully they will come back stronger now as people start going out more. But it's been taken in. I mean, she's been given for, I think the way she's been doing it is also very constructive. It is emotive. There is anger, right? It's existentialist. There is empathy. But somehow, you know, you follow through the debate at the UN level with the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Secretary General. Now, so there is a way to also sort of channel it. And this is sort of the pragmatism, because we also need figures like her and others. Malala, I mean, there's so many young, bright, strong, courageous youngsters that do raise issues out there and somehow manage to also bridge generations, right? And therefore force it upon us, their role models, force it upon us to act. Athanasie, you want something, add something to what we've been talking about?
I think that there is still something missing coming from the anger. Apparently, all the discussion today is circling around anger, and not strangely.
You started it.
Yes. it came out spontaneously, but I feel that it's something bigger than those problems that have to do with one aspect or several aspects of our social life that now go, of course, international. Climate change is not a problem of Greece or of Europe or the West, but it's a global problem, the global warming, etc. The same thing happens with inequalities. But this change of social structures, the end of patriarchy, if we may say, and the transition to a different model that has not born yet. And the identity politics, as I said before, and I insist on this because it seems that the people are looking for a new model, a new role model that is not born. And if we also add the fact that we have a symbol, like as we said about Greta Thunberg, for example, if we need a symbol so empathetic and so emotional that as a teenager or a child becomes the voice of so many other people, and we don't have, let's say, a senior politician or someone with a new dynamic, maybe someone 40, 45, 50 years old. It says many things about our societies. It says many things about our politics. And this is the question for me that remains still to be answered. Who and how is going to unite the people, and in a single question? And what is, after all, the right question to raise so as to try to find the right solution? I quote what Einstein is said to have said many years ago, that if he had 1 hour to solve a problem, he would spend 55 minutes to address the question properly, and then the solution would come naturally.
This is very
We
much
have 5 minutes left, Dimitri.
Yeah. This is very much in line with what you were saying before, David, also about, you know, are we angry about the right things, and are we angry about the same things? And so the question also, the framing, the process itself is very interesting. The last comment that I have here, I mean, Stefanos Valianatos again talks about, of course, we are talking very generally, but because Stefanos is also involved in a lot of civil society stuff dealing with the two shores of the Mediterranean, he's talking about civil society and its role and how it's different in the southern Mediterranean countries, where state institutions that are ill-prepared to play their role as opposed to the north. but their political rights are more problematic, and therefore the expression of that anger or not is not the same, because if you try to speak, you would be severely sanctioned, as opposed to in our societies, whether it's Greece, Austria, the US, and so on. But this is also something that we have to deal with. Anyway, I don't have, someone has raised their hand. Olga, I think you should ask the question. I've sent you a message. If you have a question, please write it in chat. Otherwise, I think as we're winding down, I think we've had a very interesting discussion. I had no idea where this would go. I mean, because Hannes at the beginning said we do not know, and he's right. We're trying to define it, but I think, and whether it's defining moment or not, I mean, I understand your reticence, David, about whether, you know, this is again a Y2K moment or a 9/11 moment, but it stays with us. The fact of the matter is, in the post-Cold War era, there are more and more of these moments, and there's a trend there too, right? Whether it's in the realm of foreign policy, international relations, or whether in terms of society, we have more and more of these moments. So that in itself is suggesting that we need to somehow be more involved in our role as citizens. So I think we've raised some questions which Serdar and I will try to figure out and maybe come back at a later stage in the fall to see whether we need to continue this debate differently. I mean, our next conversation, which we're planning in a couple of weeks, will be about the role of civil society organizations, not civil society in general, and how, you know, probably have a speaker from Turkey, from Greece, and Romania that we thought of, that are involved in civil society and different aspects of civil society engagement. And so what is their role? Because one of the questions that also came, and I mentioned it before, is civil society's responsibility, and therefore the responsibility of organizations to lead this process. And even ourselves, I mean, David, you and I are educators, and we play with this. And I think one of the difficulties I have every year is, as I get older, I realize the generational thing every September, right? I have a new bunch of students coming in that are 18, and I'm getting a year older. And how do you connect to them? Because you have things to say based on our experience as well, right? And involvement. And so Hannes is very much involved as well as an elder statesman in trying to reach out to people. I mean, and so is Thanasius. So how do we do this role as well? How do we take all these things in, allow for a variety of voices to be heard, allow for the anger there to be discussed as well, and then try to constructively, the word pragmatism was used, how to constructively build bridges, empower people, but tell them, you know, empowerment comes with a certain sort of norms, framework with which we can work if we want to be constructive in changing societies. So I'd like to thank you for this very interesting discussion, and hopefully we'll try to continue this in the fall. I would prefer we do this in person. There's a value to that as well. But if not, we will continue this debate in this form. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dimitri, for the invitation. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
All the best. Thank you very much.
Well done, Dimitri. We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.